All right, welcome everyone to this last pack meetup. I think you've been waiting for this one for several weeks. Yes, we've
I was
been.
right.
Yeah. Oh, I'm respecting licenses and respecting everything and copyrights. Maybe not. We'll figure out. But never. No, just I try to find a song that will fit for the last pack meetup, and that was the only one that was meaningful for me. So yeah, last pack meetup, we've been trying to deliver those since the 1st of April, covering different topics. Thanks for everyone to suggest those topics. And tonight we have our last pack meetup is going to talk about browser-based rendering. And for that, I have several, again, other pack members with us. And for the last pack meetup, I have an honor, and I'm really excited to have Joe Colantonio with us. If you have never heard about Joe, I'm pretty sure that you never go to the social medias. He is organizing the test talks, the Perf Guild, Automation Guilds. He has lots of great conferences, a lot of things. And here he's with us tonight. And also I'd like to remind for those who's not aware, Joe is organizing also a virtual conference called Perf Guild. Perf Guild will be happening next week, next Monday, by the way. So you'll still have the chance to register and be part of the conference. So Joe, welcome on board. How are you?
Awesome. Great. Thanks for having me. I've been a long time viewer, first time attendee. So this is awesome.
Cool. Thanks. We still have also our Kiwi for living in the UK. We have Yen. So Yen, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Andre. Pleasure to attend again. Sorry I missed last week's. Other things came up, but I did record it, and interesting. But no, looking forward to tonight, and hi everybody, and everybody who's joined in the background. I'm sure we're going to have another very good session.
We have a new member that was interested to interact with us and bring value to our discussion. It's Arthur. So Arthur has been as a colleagues of Alan Gordon, so he's been there several times. So Arthur, how are you today?
Hi, Hendrik. Thanks. I'm very well. Yeah, I'm looking very much forward to tonight's discussion. I was a little bit surprised I'm part of the panel, but anyway, here I am. So I'm looking forward to hear all the different opinions that we have on browser performance, as I think browser performance is actually one of the biggest topics, and it's also a little bit unknown. So I'm really looking forward to a lively discussion on this topic.
And we have the master of OBS again, without naming him. It's Senior Performer. Senior Performer, how are you?
Hey, amigos. Thank you very much for letting me join you again to this last meetup, at least for this season, I'm guessing and hoping. But I'm really glad and happy to be able to join you back on a topic that I do really know well and have some experience.
Cool. And I don't know if you have you seen that the HD quality of the Senior Performer. We have the version 1.0 last few weeks ago, and now we have the version 2.0, which is a brandy and fancy quality. It's pretty awesome to see that. We have also a good friend of ours that has been part of the pack, physical pack, and also virtual pack. It's Bruno Odu. So hi, Bruno. How are you?
Hello, everybody. Thank you to to let me come on this virtual meetup. It is the first time that I participate to the meetup. I was not available for the last 7 of all. And yes, I'm a member of the pack, and I would like to discuss today about this subject, which is quite interesting and for the future. So I'm interested to see what the other member will tell about it, and see if I've got the good vision of it, and what can I bring to everyone. That's it. Hello.
And we have the one that is always waking very early to be part of this. It's pretty pretty awesome to have you, Scott, and you've been following us since the beginning of the meetup. So thanks, Scott, so much to be here again. So how are you? I guess you had a, I hope you slept well, because I think it's 7 a.m. You mentioned that since a few minutes ago.
I've got my morning coffee, so yeah, looking forward to an interesting topic. Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
We have David Jones from Dynatrace. He was with us last week on blockchain, and it's great to have you back, David. So how are you, David? Live from Canada.
Exactly. No, we're doing well. The sun is out. It's actually warm now compared to last time that we talked. So I am very, very happy.
And we have also Alexander Podelko. He's been part of several pack meetups, several virtual packs, several physical pack as well. So Alexander, it's always great to have you with us. So how are you, Alexander, today?
I'm fine, thank you. Looking forward to interesting discussion.
Awesome. All right, so let's start the discussion. So I'm going to make the music pause, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult to hear the different discussion that we will have. Also, just remind that Joe just pushed a link in the chat for this conference, and there's a special discount code that you can utilize to have access to the conference that will happen next Monday. All right, so when I looked at this topic a few years ago, we were never much so concerned, because most of the web app were very basics, I would say, where most of the rendering were basic. And now, since now 5-6 years, more and more JavaScript frameworks come up, and we are having more and more logic happening on the browser. More things happens, more loading. So it's very hard to measure that. And there are, I think, 2 dimensions when it comes to web pages. There is those traditional Angular, EXTJS, and the others. And then we have the single page apps, which is also another challenge. And when it comes to load testing, it could be a challenge. And there are different approach to measure that. And I would like to first ask Leandro to start, for example. What would be the recommended approach to measure the right response times, first of all, while you are generating or measuring performance? I'm referring to load testing here. So how can you measure precisely the user experience and not only the request response times?
Well, to open, thanks for giving me the opportunity to start the conversation. This is a bit of a polemic topic lately, where, as you mentioned, the web layer has not been paid too much attention over the years, and it's becoming even more of a pressing requirement, because you lately can start to pack so much into that layer that that on itself can become a performance bottleneck. The peculiar thing here is that even as it is a performance topic, I know that's why I'm saying it's a bit controversial. I tend to refer to the web tier not so much dependent on load, which it is. I cannot totally take it out of the picture, but I think that load testing is on one hand a field that we have hammered literally and figuratively as much as we could, but the web front end, the UI, we have not paid that much attention, because often it's a layer that it's a bit far from our reach. Sometimes the graphic design areas are the ones molding it and working on it. And as well, it's something that many of these persons putting it together do not have performance in mind. And again, I'm not talking about load, the performance, how does it develop in a customer's machine? I always give this example: who hasn't had this experience that only 4 Chrome browser tabs open are slowing out all your computer? I recently visited one of these t-shirt websites where you can design and print them. And they pop up a beautiful, very functional design application on the web, but it was so heavy that I'm sure it doesn't have to do anything with performance or with load, but it was slowing down my computer. I was listening to music on it, and even that was being slowed down. And that's when you know, okay, this application is awesome, looks great, but needs serious tuning on the front end. And this is where some people do not understand very well what is the difference from load testing and on the web protocol. And you know me, I always try to come up with some examples and analogies to help explain. And to this, I always give the explanation like your web server is an IKEA factory where you are, or warehouse where you have everything that you order for. And the web protocol, the web page is that table, chair, whatever you ordered from IKEA, getting at your place. How easy is it to put it together, to assemble it? And usually this doesn't matter too much with the factory, with the warehouse. Even if there are 1,000 orders, once you get it, the work to putting it together, if it's well designed, it's easy. If it's not, and with IKEA, you get both of those worlds. Sometimes it's really easy. You just plug two things and they are assembled. And sometimes it's rocket science. And I know even some services that you can hire to help you putting together IKEA furniture. So it's a different type of approach, and on a layer that the performance testing world was not that used to pay so much attention to. But being the point, we want to help our users, customers, to get the best experience, and poor performance, even in just the front end, regardless of load, can be a big drag. So that's more or less my.
The problem with your example of IKEA is usually you go to IKEA to buy just a chair and you come back with several stuff because it's the way it's been designed. So I don't know if it's.
Well, I'm talking about IKEA in COVID times
just,
that you need to be sent at home.
I know. It was a just joke. No, I got the idea. So here you're more referring about doing web performance, pure web performance, just validating that with a single user, at least everything goes well. What is your opinion, David, on that?
So, testing, and that's actually the crux of the issue, is that most UX designers, when they are actually designing for performance, they're going to do something like pop open your Chrome developer tool, and they're going to walk through a bunch of scenarios in their Chrome developer tool. The challenge is that that's a single instance of data. Like that's a single session. Often it's being run in a very sort of controlled sort of circumstance. From our standpoint, what you really want to do if you want to be successful at this, obviously our good friends over at Neotys, they have capabilities to allow you to run a comprehensive load test where you're not just load testing those back-end response times like you were mentioning, but you are simulating the load as different browser types. And so when you combine that with something like what we do, and if you don't mind, let me just sort of show you an example here. So when you combine that with what we do, it provides a lot of capability. Now here for folks, if you've never seen this before, I'm sure all of you probably have. This is an example of the Chrome developer tools. And for a single instance, a single developer, this is we're going to provide us a whole bunch of really interesting sort of data. The consoles I like are the network console. I like running these performance tests in the Chrome developer tools. But if I'm doing a load test, and if I'm trying to understand from a more comprehensive perspective, how things are behaving, then I want to use something like Neotys, and I want to get some visibility across, multiple page loads. Across multiple different conditions. I want to see what a page load looks like in Chrome compared to how it looks like in, say, Mozilla, as opposed to how it loads in, say, something like a Safari. Now, one of the things that we're doing in combination with, if you were using Neotys and say, I'm a vendor, Dynatrace, one of the things that we do here at Dynatrace is we capture sessions or user sessions, and we provide a whole bunch of performance related metrics. So here we can see a user session that was being executed from someone on a Chrome 56 browser, and we're testing from, and in this case, we're picking up these results from somewhere in Munich, Germany. Now, if I scroll down here, you can see that we're picking up not only the page loads, but the XHR events. And so the key thing here is that when you are testing for response time, you do have to keep in mind that some of your applications are going to be these single page applications. And so we need to understand not only what is the page load time behavior, but what is the behavior of any subsequent XHR request. From our standpoint, you can see that, you know, we can go through any one of these actions, which could be a step within a functional load test, and we can pull back things like your request time, time to first byte, when your HTML is downloaded. But what we can do is we can provide even more detail. And let me just sort of bring up this view right here, which is what we call a waterfall. So this waterfall allows us to understand these different W3C navigation timings that become really critical. The ones that are super important are going to be things like, for example, your DOM interactive. That's the moment with which somebody could literally start interacting with a component on the page. But then there's other things that you need to, if we're talking about browser rendering from a performance perspective, other measures that you might want to include, things like speed index, for example. Speed index gives us an idea as to how fast the majority of the display starts to get populated. And then the other measure that we are very, very keen on here is visually complete. So visually complete is telling us how much time is it taking for the viewable window to actually display. There could be things loading in this page below the fold as I scroll down here, you know, that those objects are being loaded, but in this case, they don't necessarily impact our visually complete time. Now, this sort of, you know, adding this to a Neotys load test, you know, really starts to give people a lot of different options. On top of that, if we go back to that session that we were looking at, if we are talking about rendering and browser rendering, if that's the theme or the topic of today, one of the things that you also want to get is not just an understanding of the events in terms of what's happening when a page loads or an XHR request fires. Not only do we want to get visibility into those different W3C navigation timing metrics, but we also want to be able to understand what does the page look like when it's actually being run. So in this case, what we can do is layer on top of that load test, if that browser client that is driving the load actually can execute JavaScript, then it can execute our JavaScript, which allows us to actually capture what we call a session replay. Now, I am now taking my hands off my keyboard. What you see on the screen is actually a visual playback that we captured during this particular session that was being executed. And what we're doing now is we are showing the different events when people are interacting with components of the page. Think of this scenario. What happens if I, as a developer, add a component to the page, which is maybe it's a call out, something like a pop-up window. And now that pop-up window is actually covering my submit button. That type of scenario happens all the time, and it's very, very difficult to actually understand when that's occurring, because normally when we're doing our testing, we're only looking at numbers related to, here's a request, here's the result I got back. And unless you're actually looking at visually what's going on, sometimes you can even miss things there. So that's a lot to digest, but let me just sort of throw that out there for conversation.
That's pretty. I mean, session replay. Have the chance to look at it several times. I love that technology. It's pretty cool. And just to remind to all one, and if you use NeoLoad, we are at the protocol level. So if you want a session replay, you will have to combine with a browser-based automation tool like Selenium or other, and we're working on a prototype, by the way. Yeah, if you just fire the request like we do at the protocol level, then you won't be able to take advantage of the session replay. Just to make it short. Scott, you just raised a hand.
Yeah, it's and this is a question that's been going around for the last few years. I think about business usually asks me what's the render time and stuff like that. So I think the whole idea of what we've got here is the philosophy I've always taken, and I'm wondering if someone can prove me wrong, is local execution is still happening locally. Once that JavaScript and that DOM has been downloaded, then it's completely out of our control. Yeah, it's dependent on the user's machine, how many Excel windows they've got open, what it's doing. At the moment, my machine here is munging a large R data set and stuff like that, so I would assume that there would be a performance hit and things like that. To me, the real value of this comes to, I'm running a test against a single page application at a protocol level. Now, my response times are quite high because I haven't been able to accurately simulate a number of parallel requests coming through. If I then hook that into a Selenium test and have that running at various times during my test, then I get a delta of, this is what I'm seeing at protocol level, this is what I'm seeing at a user eye level, as we say, and see if that delta remains relatively constant. And to me, that's where this comes from. I think the other thing to push, we talk about shift left a lot and things like that. I kind of look at it as a different way, that one of the first things I ask functional testers when I come onto a new gig is, is there anything that seems really, really slow? And there's always something, right? Because that's why I'm there. And you just work with them, with the browser tools. And then instantly you get that time to first byte versus the waterfall. And you can start determining, where do I need to look at this like right now? Is there something really crazy like a 12 megabyte JavaScript that's coming down and being executed? Or do I have a lot of network latency? Or do I have a long time to first byte? Or is my screen paint taking a very long time because there's some crazy DOM thing happening? Or in the case of a computer hardware site I reached out to recently, it's a combination of all of those things happening at the same time. So from a functional testing and performance testing point of view, this seems almost like a very free thing that you can do right from the beginning of the engagement. It's just hit F12, see what it's doing through the various business processes, and then use the application yourself when it's under load, and hit F12 every now and again and make sure that stuff is coming down. So it's a very interesting topic that I feel a little conflicted about in some ways, as to how we communicate it with business and with lay people, that this is not a load test, this is a test of how various UI elements that you have built are interacting together. But that's almost in a lot of ways independent to how many users you have running in the background.
Yeah, I think so. There are a few things maybe we should explain to the audience for those who are not familiar with those terms. First of all, maybe what would be the differences between a normal web page and a single page app, because there are consequences, especially when you have to measure the different stage where you're spending time within the browser. So for those not familiar, but there's tons of things provided standard with W3C, the navigation timing and performance library and others. Those give you tons of information, but in single page apps, those are not relevant. So I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And also there's a small comment just to remind that most of the load testing tools that are on the market, except a few that is driving real browsers, most of them are at the protocol level. So we are not driving any browser. That's why to do 500, 600 or 5 or thousands of sessions on a single machine, because we don't have to instance thousands of browsers, of course. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to do that, to achieve that type of things. Arthur, you raised a hand.
Yeah, thank you, Henrik, and also thank you, Scott and David. It's a very good introduction, and you, Leandro. I think that when it comes to browser-based performance analysis and browser-based performance testing, it's a very exciting topic from many areas. And one of the areas is that we're getting really, really close to what the end user is actually experiencing, right? I think that is something that cannot be underestimated. When we do load tests, even if we're very good at simulating the protocol-based calls, the gets and the post and the put things that we're trying to simulate from the browser, even if we're getting very good at that, it will never completely show what the end user is showing on the screen. And there are different ways, of course, you can try to compensate for that. But even if you try to compensate for that, I think David just gave a very beautiful example of the amount of metrics you can actually get out of a browser to say that they all have some performance relationship. And now the question is actually when we talk about, hey, my web page is slow, my browser is slow, or the website is slow. What do we actually mean with that? What is actually a response time? There are many different times that you can get out of this timeline. If you open Chrome Developer Tools and do a refresh, then you get multiple times out of that. The DOM ready, for instance, like David just showed, or you have the speed index, you have time to first byte. There are all kinds of metrics coming out of that. And the question is, what is actually the response time that is actually something that the user says, okay, yeah, now I think the page is ready. And I personally like the idea of the first meaningful paint. That is something that that is the first bitmap that is shown on the screen. That is actually something that is useful for the end user, right? It's not such some white page, or it's not some logo that he's actually not waiting for. It's not some advertisement, but actually something that he came to the site for originally. And if you have that as a definition, you say, okay, the first meaningful paint is that is what my response time is. That is what I want to measure. Then immediately the question pops up: how on earth am I going to measure that, and am I going to define that in an automatic way? Because what is meaningful could change from page to page and from user to user maybe also. So I'm looking forward. I'm opening this question here in the panel because I know there are a number of experts on how you would define a response time on a web page. Which metric would be most suitable for that, and how would you measure that?
It's an excellent point because I think it's very important. There's a difference between fully loaded and because I think for the user, when you are driving that type of test, I think you're fishing for user experience. Joe, do you have any things to answer to that questions?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking about, I've always used this hybrid approach. When working for an insurance company 20 years ago, we used to use GUI V-users all the time with LoadRunner because we weren't able really to get the user experience. And I think that's what people are really driving at nowadays, the user experience. So when you say, yeah, I'm able to log in a second, and that's what your protocol level script's saying, and you know, just looking at it, it doesn't look like it's taking a second because everything's still being rendered. I think management starts losing faith in the performance test. So I think it acts almost like a sanity check to run a real user or a browser user along with your protocol level. So I think that's a great setting the stage there for it. Also, you know, I used to have to deal with applications that you couldn't drive through a browser, and you know, writing like a WinSock kind of protocol script is very complicated, as opposed to, you know, LoadRunner used to have something called a Citrix script. They could do bitmap comparisons. So I think nowadays a lot of people were talking more about browsers because they think protocol level is difficult. And where virtual machines be able to scale up, they see this as a way to get more involved in performance. It doesn't replace protocol, but at least gets it so people that may not be familiar with protocol level can start getting performance metrics. And also, I think Arthur brought up a great point on either Arthur or Scott on leveraging your existing functional tests to get performance metrics. So if you're running performance tests, not performance tests, but functional tests in your pipeline, in my other company, we used to use a tool called Serenity, which would capture at a high level how long it takes to do a certain transaction, like add a patient, check in a patient. And even though it wasn't at the protocol level, it would tell you over each sprint, hey, it used to be 10 seconds to do this, now it's taken 30. And then you can start creating a more proper performance load test. But I think using browsers initially to shift left, getting earlier performance metrics that way, and then scaling up using a full-blown performance test, I think is the way to go. And I really think this hybrid approach is optimal that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think in terms of cost generating load, having an hybrid approach is the best approach. And also, I've been using a lot. So you could oh, by the way, could you push the link or the reference to your tool to in the chat, so anyone, Joe, so anyone can have access to the tool and look at it. But I was also using quite a bit a web page test, which bring you a lot of interesting metrics and stuff like this. But I would think the only limitation with web page tests is the fact that it's stateless. It says if you have to pass a login and do several steps, it's impossible. So it makes sense for a retailer or things where you don't have to log in, where you just can push a page and see how it loads. But there are other tools, obviously, to do that. So Jan, do you have any things to add or to answer to authors' questions?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. I mean, so the hybrid approach, I think, is any way you can really achieve it to get a realistic understanding of browser or rendering performance as load increases. I think we talked about. I mean, in the old days, it was a mix of functional and non-functional scripts in the same tool. You could do that with load running. You could do that with a few of the tools that are around there. I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is give the end user the best perception of performance, whether the system's under light or peak loading. And it's, I mean, there's this metric I think that David touched on, visually complete, seems to be quite a popular measure of the quality of UX performance at the moment. And you know, it's a debatable point. I think if you can ensure that you don't put blockers in the way of users interacting with the browser UI, or even, or you know, but it's not just browsers these days. Browsers, it's mobile apps. It's a whole, because we have a whole range of different sort of ways of interacting with software applications now. If you minimize the blockers, you put as much asynchronous characteristics into your design. So even if a web page doesn't completely render, the key things are there, so you can continue to navigate, continue to interact with the site. I think that's important. I mean, these are the sort of things you're going to find under load. As you say, a single user, Scott was saying, you can do some tuning, hit debug, look for the obvious things that can be negatives on rendering performance. But then you need to understand how does that change as the load increases. So the headless load that is a traditional performance test, as it scales, what changes in the UI occur? They can be quite subtle. They can be errors. Problems can occur at a certain level of load that manifest themselves in the sort of the rendering performance. So whether the user can interact with the UI or not. It's an interesting area, but I think ultimately it's giving the end user the best perception of good, a perception of good performance, regardless of the level of load that's actually being applied to a web application. And you know, most clients now would have. It would be unusual for there not to be a UX team around. Let's say their mission in life is to ensure that the UI parts of an application is as tuned and optimized as much as possible. I think that there's plenty of tools around that allow you to do that. But then understanding what happens under various levels of loads is where obviously load testing comes in. And in order to do that, you've got to have some representation, some automation of the browser front end as part of your test, and appropriate measurements being taken in order to get that understanding. It's a very, very interesting topic, and given me more than one or two headaches over the years, try to come up with a sort of a reasonable set of metrics that is reflective of how the application is performing at different levels of load in terms of what the user sees. So that would be my my comment.
Yeah, but I think from Leandro's perspective, I think there is a two different dimension. Oh, we have a special guest. I see here that he made a presentation to our virtual pack. So I'm going to promote him for sure. I don't know if you know him. I'm pretty sure Senior Performer has heard about that guy. It's It's Mark Thompson. So Mark, welcome aboard. So I just invited to be a panelist. Just to add, oh, here you are. Hey Mark. I saw that you were doing some barbecue on the weekend, so I'm pretty impressed on the setup that you had, by the way. Just to add to Jan's comment, I think there is, Leandro mentioned that there are also websites that are pretty much very heavy in terms of when you utilize it's consumed tons of memory and so on, because maybe the JavaScript, the way it's been designed, is not optimized. So I think obviously there is a real need to do web performance and figure out where you're spending time, if the JavaScript is optimized, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, I think combining this approach with load testing could be a way also to identify any potential problems, because I think from my perspective, I think that sometimes when there are load, some asynchronous call that happens in the background could be slowed down and could be impacting the user. So that's, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's definitely it could be an impact. So Bruno, we don't hear you much so far. So Bruno, do you have anything to add to the conversations? Or?
Yeah, why not? I picked some idea from Leandro. I love this idea that a single page application is IKEA. It's like IKEA. Yes, it's easy to buy a furniture to IKEA. You can put it in your car because it's packed, and after you spend a lot of time to build your furniture at home. So yes, of course, it means that now a single page application, a new application, this kind of new application designed by a framework are made like IKEA. So you spend many time to design, to build it in your browser. And I have many times a problem with my clients who ask me, what is the response time of my server? And they don't think about the response time of the server, but they think about the response time in the page, the UX experience, the user experience. So there is a confusion between that. So that's why I'm arriving to the second point. The second point about, I think that Joe was asking, oh no, that's Arthur who asked, so what is the performance measurement? What are the measurements that we can make? Is it the response time of the page? Is it the first byte appearance? Is it interaction moment? We see in as our friend of Dynatrace shows us, we see that there are many indicators that Dynatrace propose. They don't care about which is the best indicator. They just say, okay, we have many indicators. We have an indicator of page download, time to first byte, and after indicators that the DOM is complete and the full interaction is possible in the page. All these indicators are different. In Dynatrace, they propose all the indicators to be sure that you pick up your indicator, you do what you want, but you can choose which indicator is yours. But that means that actually we don't know which is a good indicator in this new problematic of single page application. I don't know what is the best indicator, but my reference is always the customer. When they tell me this page is long, I always ask them, explain me what does it long for you. Is it long because it takes time for appearance, or it takes times to download, or it takes times when you click to have something interact with you, and it depends of the people. When it's IT people, they tell me it's long because in the network it's long. When it's people from the business, they tell me it's long because after several seconds we want to move from this page. It's too long to come. So it's a question of perception. That's the difficulty of our business today, and that's why user experience meetup is complicated, because this performance indicator, I don't know which is a good one, and it could be different from a company and to another. It could be different from the inside application and from the e-business application. So of course, the good point of view is to give all the indicator and to compare all the indicator like they do in Dynatrace. Do what you want with your indicator. You can make the graphs that you want, and you can compare after what you want. But let me tell you something about pure performance in the old way. Before the single page application, we spend many times to optimize the server to design a page, to design a full page, HTML page with some good CSS and some good JPEG. a page made around 400 milliseconds to be designed and broadcast in a navigator. 400 milliseconds, it's very quick when you design a complex page, a good design page. So I spend many times with my clients to design, to optimize server, able to deliver between 10 and 12 pages per second per CPU. Okay, indicator 10 page per second per CPU. This is an indicator that I use to talk to my clients about their architecture and the ability to deliver a very quick page. Now we have another problem. They optimize all the server. They spend millions and millions of euro to optimize the server, Hybris server, Oracle server, Java server to optimize and to design, to create page. And now the problem is the time is spent in the browser. And it doesn't depend about their server, it depends about the CPU of the user, the CPU of the navigator, the memory of Chrome, of Internet Explorer. It depends on something they don't have the hand on it. In companies, they can have the hand on telling everybody is using Internet Explorer 8, 11, etc. But in e-business, it's not possible. So they are working to spend a lot of money in CDN in order to have cache everywhere, in order to manage this problem of response time with many requests, many JavaScript, many calling of CSS when the XHR is calling a new request. So now the money is not spent in the server, in optimization of server. It's spent of designing page. That's what you said at the beginning. And so the problematic is not coming from us how to design page, it's coming from which, how we call that, which Symfony or React do we use to design a very quick page? How do we call that? Framework.
Yeah.
Sorry. It was, which framework is the best one? And this question is not alive. I don't see this question everywhere. I don't see this question anywhere. So this could be the good question, which is a good framework to design very quick page. And does this framework give you indicator when you design a page? Does it give you indicator to make quick page? That's it.
I think that thanks Bruno for that. I think there is from what you mentioned, there's one thing which is important is the and yeah, it's been mentioned by Jan and the others. From the moment you start to be able to click somewhere or to feel that it's been loaded, the customer seems happy. I mean, if you look at Amazon, you can have the page, you start to browse and click on everywhere, but in fact, in real life, the rest is still loading in the back end. And as a customer, we don't complain. We are happy about it. And this is the right KPI. When is the customer is able to officially interact with it? And I think there is a big challenge. I think there is the traditional web page with tons of JavaScript, and there's this concept that's been mentioned several times, the single page apps, or concept of lazy loading. I don't know. And where every time you do something, there is no loading anymore. It's just some JavaScript that change the structure of the page lively. So this concept of when should I interact or when can I touch the screen is very difficult to measure. And I have no clear answer. I mean, there has been, by the way, someone in the last virtual pack, we had a great presentation about it. So how can we time and measure on the browser? So at the moment, there is no clear answer. I mean, I think it's instrumentation. And Alejandro just raised just the hand, so maybe you have something about it. Do you have any approach outside of just instrumenting your JavaScript code or your web page to measure where you're spending the time and collect that? Do you have another smarter approach?
Well, it's funny because, as you mentioned, there are multiple ways. As everything with performance testing, a good answer generally is it depends on what you're trying to do, what do you need, what are the goals, and what is the nature of the application. There were some comments that, as an example, when Scott was mentioning the experience of arriving at a customer, that you need to probably load test, automate something. And I do agree. The first step is like, well, let me just see the page render, pop up the developer tools. Let's see what can I observe right there, right away. And start doing some assessments depending. And this is one where I would say you require to have some sort of experience working with this type of things to understand. And like the girl in the red dress in the Matrix, it's just code flowing, but you just see it right there when you get enough experience. And you don't even need the rendering tool happening. And this is something that I couldn't say it's a one way or the only way that you can gather this. It's based off experience, different situations. As Arthur was asking, like, what is more important when you receive all the code or when the page finished rendering? Again, it depends on what do you need. And some of these metrics that you were asking, Hendrik, will be very different. As an example, let's say, what is the problem? Some design teams or functional teams that I saw someone asking if this shouldn't be cached on the functional phase layer of the testing process. Some of these, some people do not even have like mindset, experience, or the eyes to look at that matrix code and differentiate what is happening. When I'll give you a quick example, a couple of quick examples. Humongous JavaScript files that you say, well, it's you think it's a very smart way to do. Why I don't download all the JavaScript that will be needed, even as the user will only click one thing and get away. You're forcing them to download a humongous JavaScript file when it's not needed. Probably even worse because the web developer, again, probably was a designer or someone that was not that aware of that. The expertise area of this person is more on making things look attractive. Probably they put that humongous JavaScript code in the server that has the web application as well. Do not use a CDN, do not distribute this. And this is an example that I have seen lately on many organizations, just because this front end allows you to just bring a lot of information and work with that kind of offline. They are like, okay, the time that the user arrives at lands at the page, I'm going to download all the freaking database of records that we have just in case they have to work. And they're like, there's no problem. Well, right now, probably there is not problem, but let's wait on two scenarios. When 100 people try to access the page at the same time and everyone tries to download that huge amount of data, that's going to be a problem. And down the road, when your data grows large enough and you have billions and billions of records, as Carl Sagan would say, you would have a big problem there where just one user tries to download all the applications. So again, thinking things through CPU cycles, how much are you forcing to not only the CPU to work, the network to communicate, how much RAM, how much stuff are you storing locally? It's a complete full beast that you need to pay attention to. And the metrics and things that you can put to detect this type of things, again, are extensive and very varied to be able to do a one ring rules them all solution. So,
Scott, you raised your hand.
Yeah, it's a comment was made. I can't remember by who, and I apologize for that, about issues with performance on the back end because a user's machine was under-specced on the front end, and the CPU was grinding through, and basically session states and things like that were being held open for a very, very long time because the local machine couldn't process what it needed to process fast enough, and therefore session, etc., 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 is being held on the server. It's almost in some ways going back to like the bad old days, where if you had a whole lot of users, for instance, who were connecting over 33.6 modems, those were the guys that would kill your system, as opposed to the ones that were coming in over broadband, because again, that connection had to be held for so much longer to get the data backwards and forwards and things like that through the pipe. So it's almost like a case in some ways of what lessons can we learn from the past that can we apply today. And it's sort of like, if the single page app is going to execute locally on the user's machine in like 1 second for it to go through and do all of its parsing and stuff like that, at the protocol layer, can we increase the concurrency across that? It's sort of like we do in any other load test. It's like my user might be in for 5 minutes, but for this, I'm going to vary the session state by, say, 25% either way. And start really, really increasing that concurrency and see where things start falling over. To Leandro's point, I've worked on a system that did exactly what he was saying about 6 years ago. And it was an enterprise system, and we couldn't figure out why until basically we put Fiddler on and just sat there and watched this thing while we were doing nothing. And we could start seeing all of these calls coming out and figure out that this is the one that we need to simulate. And we traced that call all the way back to the mainframe, and sure enough, it was bringing back everybody's data back to the front end, selecting the record that it needed, throw everything else away, and then repeat the call. So it would get your first name, then it would get your second name, then it would get your address, etc., etc., etc. And each one of these was a full call down to the mainframe. And it's like, it can be done without a tool or without a browser, but it requires that extra little bit of expertise, I think, and a little bit of sheer bloody mindedness to sit there and try and figure it out.
It reminds me when you had to deal with the modern web apps and you had to script or build at least a load testing script. People were recording and say, I'm going to record and playback. But in real life, you should not do that. You should do what exactly you described. Look at what happens on the Fiddler when you do nothing. Maybe there are stuff generated by JavaScript, and maybe wants to build a representative protocol-based script that will reflect what you just described. So I totally agree with you. So David, you just raised the hand.
Yeah, no, because what Scott was talking about is just it's so compelling and interesting, and I've run into it so many times now, especially with the people with existing enterprise applications. I put a note of it into the chat, and that is, I've seen lots of insurance companies running software in IE compatibility mode. When they do that, essentially all of that parallelism that modern browsers allow for in terms of supporting parallel connections goes away. And so you can only have 2 connections per domain. And in that case, you get this situation where the client is introducing a instant bottleneck that gets felt by everyone that's trying to connect to that server, because that client is now consuming a whole bunch of connection ports and things like that. It's surprising how often this actually comes up, and for the most part, people become absolutely mystified when you start talking about the details in terms of how browsers actually behave when it comes to handling things like parallel connections. So that is, what Scott brought up was, I thought, very, very interesting. And I can tell you for a fact I have seen this in the real world and continue to see it today.
And moreover, we're going to see more and more for sure. Alexander, you tried to raise your hands, but your hands is like invisible.
Yeah, background is tricky stuff. I want to change topic a little and bring it to tools. So it looks like we have at least 4 silos here. And so again, people here probably more familiar with traditional load testing tools. Then we have functional testing tools, which now we get more and more get involved with promise that easier script creation. But there is a lot of problems here because usually they were not designed with measuring performance in mind, and actually no information what they support, because for load testing tools, you usually know which protocol they support. For GUI tools, you usually need to try to figure out is it working or not, if there is some components that maybe not plain HTTP there. Then we have these tools which allow to see what happens client-side at communication, like web page test, site speed IO, which great tools, a lot of information if you have single page or few pages. But as Henrik mentioned, if you have the scenario when you need to log in and do something and have a lot of calls going on, it is big challenge how you can use it. And actually they also not catching everything. For example, JavaScript basically left behind. So you need these browser development tools to see that. So at least 4 different silos. And the question is how to get them all together to work. And for example, I'm working with applications that have all these problems. Single page application, a lot of not HTTP elements there, like working with Word documents or PowerPoint documents in browser. And of course, sophisticated scenario when you go from one point to another. And that is definitely a challenge. And yes, what Dave show a little bit in Dynatrace, that show some promise in that. But again, it is not, it is more for standard, and you need to get all these pieces together. And it become big challenge now, especially when you work in development and need to get some kind of continuous performance testing. Server is not enough anymore. You need to get everything to catch all kind of regressions.
Thanks, Alexander. I'm super happy that you bring up that question, because I think it's pretty sure that a lot of the attendees is hoping to get an answer on that question, because I fully agree there are tools that are really specialized for one thing. There is no one tool that will rule them all. It doesn't exist yet. I hope that sometimes they will do. And raise the hand. So maybe you want to add something to what Alexander just mentioned. David?
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, earlier when I was talking a little bit about what we do from Dynatrace perspective, when we were looking at that user session information, a couple of comments came up in the chat window about, you know, well, you can't really do that if you're doing, if your load test isn't driving a real browser. And granted, absolutely right. And to Alexander's point, that often when you're doing a load test, it is, you know, potentially a good best practice to actually be doing a number of things in parallel. For example, if I just showed this example right here, one of the things that you could be doing while you are executing a load test, and so, you know, you're using something like Neotys or whatever it might be, you're generating a massive amount of requests to that system, is that you could, in parallel, be using something like Selenium. Well, obviously, we're a vendor, so we have something else, which is our synthetic monitoring. So our synthetic monitoring would play through a number of click paths or use cases, scenarios, business processes that we would walk through. And you could have these going on at the exact same time that your load test is being executed. For example, what that would then allow you to see is when you're looking at, for example, a page load here, here we have a load action with a page load, and we can get down into those metrics that we were talking about before, you know, whether or not it's time to first byte. But I think the ones that were really relevant here would be things like the visually complete. Now, the nice thing about doing the testing from a synthetic standpoint in combination when you're doing your load testing is that the synthetic tests sort of weed out that concern that we had before, that maybe there's something else going on my machine that's chewing up a bunch of CPU. The synthetic tests should be being run from very controlled machines. And so that should give you at least some accuracy in terms of the response times that you would be getting from your visually complete. And then if you're concerned about whether or not the XHR functions are impacting the rendering or the visually complete, you would get that as well, because in this particular case, here we have an XHR function. We're not seeing all of the other page load metrics, but we are getting how it's impacting the visually complete of the page refreshing. So this is, potentially a good best practice that people can do themselves. Obviously, you could do this with something like Selenium, but in this particular case, obviously, it's something that we bring to the table as well.
Yeah, I agree. So we usually try to recommend combining just for the sake of the cost of the hardware required for load testing, to do protocol level load testing, because it's going to be cheaper, and then add on top of that few browser-based sort of technologies to get the feeling, to get the perception, to get the feedback on how fast the page were. Mark, so you here and you've been presenting stuff about web performance or virtual backend. I'm pretty sure that you have tons of things to tell about that topic today.
Yeah, let me share one thing that might be interesting, different than all of the excellent technical analysis. You guys are right on. Absolutely. I mean, I learn from you guys every day some of the things that all the different tools can bring together. But an interesting story from my perspective, about 15 years ago, witnessing our granddaddy load runner do its work at the protocol level and making great market strides, supporting all sorts of new protocols, the future of the web. And I had worked on the product at a time when Web 2.0 and Ajax frameworks and all this stuff was getting really interesting. And of course, you guys might remember that because of the market dominance of that product, that we had basically told a generation of load testers, everything you need is in Load Runner. That's all you need. All you need is Load Runner. And, to be a performance tester or performance engineer, performance anything, you're the cream of the crop, you're the certified this, that, and the other thing. At the same time, I had taken this break from life. I'd met Andy Grabner, working for Segway and then working for Dynatrace, and I'd worked with profilers and I'd done all sorts of kernel profiling. And wow, there's a whole lot more to performance than just a load testing tool. And I was a firm believer in integrations, and that was one of the things that when I did get a chance to work with the Load Runner product, I had to fight with many different people. A good argument, debate is good, but really have to make a business argument for the fact that the definition of a performance problem was much bigger than just load. To Alex's point, there are other silos of what is a bottleneck, where is a bottleneck happening, how do I find that bottleneck, to David's point, and how do I make it easy to solve it and actually get people on a good path for how do I think like a performance problem can happen anywhere in the architecture. And I got to maybe put together 6 or 7 different tools to try to do that in an efficient way across multiple teams. So when we came out with the whole Load Runner solution for running Firefox or running a DOM, running the JavaScript engine, it was another approach we looked at. Some really interesting solutions, but still we had this, I don't want to call it an army, but we had this huge community of people who were load testers, 90% of them. So if you came to them and said, hey, I think something's slow on the front end over here, like Bruno's conversation, it was like, oh, the answer was somebody else does that. In the chat, the developer should take care of that. Or, 10 years have gone by, Steve Souders, hey, isn't he a developer? That's not my community. It didn't show up at the HP Universe Mercury conference, whatever no one was talking about. Wow, why weren't we talking about that? So I think there's something about the shakeup we've seen, and Henrik knows this really, really well in terms of how the different load tools have come to expand and embrace or be inclusive of all the different places that you can find a performance problem. And to some extent, I'm responsible for saying, yeah, I'm a load tester, but it's not enough. We have to change. And that for me, that was 10 years ago, and started going off to do other stuff with Shunra at the network level, working in the other applications that were doing cloud-based load testing and finding other infrastructure issues in the cloud, which led to the whole conversations about CDN. And then within the last couple of years, you're right, Henrik, it's been like, how do we do a better job with tools like Fiddler and doing a lot of work with Dynatrace to just tune into how are we getting that full picture of this stuff. So there's something to be said for, I'm a load tester. Well, that's only one silo of the 3 or 4 or 5 silos. And your thinking should be one silo, the whole big thing. You should be an evangelist or a enthusiast for performance wherever these problems may happen. And whatever tool you might use, bring them together, put them together, just like David said. So yeah, definitely.
I think, yeah, it's a combination of tools. It makes sense. And I'm happy that you bring up the network emulation, because there are still so many people who not even consider putting the network constraints when they do load testing. They are pure load testers. So they do scripting, they fire the load and say, hey, network is not my problem. I'm going to fire. And whatever it is, I'm going to measure the performance.
Yeah.
And this is just an example. And you're totally true. People, there are still people say, I'm doing performance testing, but in fact, you're doing just load testing.
Right.
And I think we have to open up and say, hey, there are plenty of various things that you need to consider when you deal with performance, not only load testing. So I'm pretty
I'll just give one shout out. Many years ago, I did a workshop, like a half-day workshop called Slow Motion Performance. And it was exactly doing front-end performance, just the rules, like why slow rules. And you would run like just any public website. Anyone could bring their website. And we would check the rules when you're on full speed network. And then we would run it through either Squid or Charles Proxy or whatever you want to slow down the network, and run the exact same thing, just client-side rules. Actually, later, I think David, Andy, and I did it with the Ajax stuff from Dynatrace. We did the same analysis. And of course, suddenly people start seeing the order and sequence of stuff rendering, and then CSS doing its work. And, it's all based on when the resources are downloaded. And you see this really, suddenly everything's in slow motion. You'd be like, oh, what was that? And what was that? And why isn't the first thing that renders the give me money button, in e-commerce, right? Or, do the thing I want you to do button should show up first. Then put the pictures and the colors and all the other stuff. It's like achieve your goals, then, do the secondary stuff.
Yeah, keep it lean and mean, Mark. Sort of like Google. Google must be the leanest page out there, which is why it flies. Okay.
Yeah,
letting it into your search stuff, it doesn't have to do much else. But
yeah, one of the biggest ones was watching Amazon at the time, Amazon.com, render because they had done this amalgamate web page with all this asynchronous loading. Fat people were like, oh my God, I've never seen like the actual slow sequence. But you can find all these interesting other bugs. You can see stuff that loads, that's like, wow, that's weird. That's actually, oh, look, there's an object that we can't even see when it fully renders. Then you can go like functional exploratory testing. You can tear the web page apart because there's these hidden things in there. Anyway, slow motion performance is a totally fun thing to do.
Sure. Arthur, you raised your hand. Arthur.
Yeah, I like Mark's remark about like what comes first on the page, right? Because that's really what is most important to the end user, is to make sure that what he actually came for on that page is actually shown as soon as possible, right? And I think it's not just that it's shown as soon as possible, but also when it's there, it actually stays on that page, right? And it's not being then when you start to read the blog message that it's suddenly pushed down because there's an advertisement coming on front. So you can say, okay, my first meaningful paint is there really soon, so I start to read, but then I lose it because there is another ad or something else that moves on the page. So, and I think there are other aspects as well. There are aspects to perceive performance which have to do with if you have an animation, so you click on something and a new page comes up or a button appears or whatever, that this animation is done in a certain frame rate which looks like it's fluent, like it's a fluent motion. So you click on it and it could open up like that and not stutter like that, because that it appears slow again. So I think there are many aspects to perceive performance which are very interesting, and they're much wider than just a response time measurement or something that we could put a second on. And many of them have some sort of a psychological aspect to them, right? Well, how does the page feel? So suddenly psychology, or at least some sort of awareness of how that page will create a kind of feeling for the end user, suddenly becomes important. Now that, for a lot of our techies, is a very difficult thing to grok, right? So how do we now suddenly define something which seems to be so soft? So that's a wonderful point I wanted to mention. Another point I wanted to mention is that we talked about browser-based load testing. I think that's really what we're going for. It's not just that we can reuse the Selenium scripts or the scripts that our friends from the GUI tests are creating, but also it really will make our load testing scripts a lot easier, I think, because you only have to deal with what is on the screen and not all these different Ajax calls which go behind, not all the parallelism. So now the question is, how would you deal with that? And that's why I think here is where the cloud comes in, and where the hardware, which is getting cheaper like by the month, will really help us. So maybe not this year, but next year, I think we will be able to perform browser-based load tests, simulating hundreds or maybe thousands of browsers at the same time, and really do what the end user is doing, and really see and measure with tools like Dynatrace, for instance, or other tools, to really measure what the end user is seeing. And I think that is really the end goal of what performance management is about.
But do you need thousands and millions of browsers to achieve that?
It's a good point. You could actually say, well, I want to simulate a million users coming to my website, but they're not all coming at the same time, right? So what you could do is you can take, say, a couple of hundred of browsers, open them up on pods or on Kubernetes or any kind of cloud solution that you have, and then make them run simultaneously, right? So that the number of concurrent browsers is still a lot less than what you would have in reality, but you will still get the load on the server that you would normally get.
Yeah, but I think that you mentioned the feeling, and I love the story that Vasilis came up the last pack. I don't remember the exact story about the airport. I don't remember which airport he was referring. I'm trying to search in Google, but I didn't find it. The story is that the passenger was complaining because every time when they were getting out from the airport, on that specific airport, which one I don't remember, they had to basically walk 2 minutes and then wait for the luggage for 10 or almost 50 minutes. So people will say, hey, it's unacceptable in this airport. We're waiting forever. I'm complaining about it. So they make some study saying, how can we change the perceptions? So instead of coming to the terminal A, which was quite close to luggage, they were changed the arrival to terminal B. So now people were walking during 50 minutes, then going down to the stairs and waiting almost 30 seconds and get the luggage. And people will say, wow, the service is amazing at the airport because it comes very, very fast. So everything is about perceptions. So I don't think that simulating thousands of browsers is required. So Mark, you raised the hand, and David, you raised the hand as well. So maybe Mark can start and then David can add.
Yeah, just really quick. Since, I don't know if everyone knows this, but Henrik is the Neoload, also a product manager, right, my friend?
Not really. I'm more on innovation, and then I'm passing back the ball to the...
Good, but you have a say. You have influence, right? Okay, so as a Neoload user, I really want to be able to take some other functional testing tool, any functional GUI type tool that Arthur's talking about, and I just want to right-click and have a menu option that says create protocol level script, and then magic AI wizardryness that you guys invent happens underneath the covers with a bunch of information taken from Dynatrace, just per se, to create my protocol level script. And then I don't need thousands of browsers, right? Now I still may run the mix, to Bruno's point. I still may run a mix that says, all right, I'm still going to do 10% GUI, 90% load, so I can get a sampling of all the kind of stuff. But yeah, so just let me know when you can get that done, Henrik.
We're almost halfway on that.
Okay.
We still have some correlation to be done on the protocol level, but we already have the right-click stuff.
Okay, good. I'm waiting.
David, you want to add something? And then I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's time to conclude. So I will let David add, and I will start the conclusion.
yeah. So I just wanted to add to parts of the comment. I wanted to get back to something that Arthur had talked about earlier on in the conversation, and that is trying to pick, functionally what the right metric is. And so I just wanted to introduce everyone, who's new to this, to just have a view as to, if you're going into the Chrome developer tools and doing a page load, and you actually do the performance analysis, exactly what you get treated to. And I think, this is an absolutely fabulous, fascinating view. But that being said, there's just so much detail in it for even a performance developer to try to understand, where should they be applying and looking at, their efforts to improve performance, because this is just literally loading an individual sample page that we had showed before. So trying to define and figure out what those metrics are that are going to be most important to you really does become an exceptionally important part of the conversation. You really do have to feel comfortable with the metrics that you're going to get your reporting back on. And that's, to make sure that you're picking things and picking metrics. I know somebody had mentioned earlier, I think Arthur, you had mentioned the first contentful paint as being a potential option. Here at Dynatrace, we really sort of gravitate towards
meaningful paint.
Yeah, the visually complete. But that being said, we know that there are people in the industry that are, interested in some of these other metrics. And so we're actually just sort of sneak preview, let people know where we're heading. We're actually adding things like the first first contentful paint, first meaningful paint, first time to meaningful interaction. So we're adding those metrics into Dynatrace as well, just to give people those options of being able to, choose a metric that, they feel comfortable with.
So almost painted, almost painted, almost about that. All right, so it's time to conclude. So it's like I told us before, it's our last pack meetup, at least for the season. And it's been great to have 2 months every week's running this pack meetup. It was pretty cool. So before we just say goodbye, and maybe we will probably organize another pack meetup, I'd like to make the conclusion. So I will ask first Joe, who his final thoughts, the final recommendations on the discussion we had just today.
So my final recommendations is low tech. I think Bruno said it best, is that understand your users. I know it sounds obvious, but most people don't listen to the users. I used to work for a hospital with radiologists, and we used to not speak to them and not know they were saying something was slow because they weren't able to do their job fast enough in a particular area of the application that we never focused on. So looking at all the graphics, all the metrics in the world would never have told us that. So, I mean, sounds stupid, but, talk to your users, find out what performance means to them, and then focus on that.
All right, thanks. Jan?
Yeah, I agree, Joe. It's at the end of the day, performance is a user perception thing. It varies across, what the application is being used for, whether you're buying stuff, you're a radiologist, you're in some other, and so, good performance means different things to different people. But essentially, it's the ability for them to use the application so they don't get frustrated. They can buy something, they can do the job, and that's key. At the end of the day, that has to be the deliverable testing, that important functionality is available and performant at load. It's an old message. And how do you achieve that? Well, it's always going to be some sort of hybrid test solution, protocol level or headless. Don't quite like that term, actually. It sounds a bit brutal, but protocol level plus functional testing combined, effectively functional testing combined in the same sort of test. And why not bring back good old crowd testing? Maybe there's a case for a bunch of people sitting in a room with different browsers, different devices. We're running a performance test, we're doing some synthetic monitoring, but at the same time, there's some real people doing stuff. I think it's a nice mix of sort of automation and reality.
Ian, if we do the work at home crowd testing, how will we deliver pizza to everyone that joins in the test? That's
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think we could use Deliveroo or somewhere like that. maybe we
Doesn't
could
Domino's
do
have an
some
app for that?
we could do some testing for Deliveroo. Maybe that's how we, you know. No, I agree. Anyway, that's my thought. You know, it really is horses for courses, but you know, focusing what in the browser is important to the end user. What do they need to click on? They will carry on to the next step. Yeah, the pictures aren't necessarily that important. It's the ability to interact, not be blocked. I think, not be frustrated. That's key, and that at peak times. So that's my thoughts.
Arthur?
Yeah, that's something I'd like to tell all the protocol-based load testers who are watching and this or listening to this. And I think it's really time for all the load testers to also look at functional tools which they might think might be inferior. It's just a GUI, right? So get yourself a dummy course on how to use Selenium. Record your first Selenium script. And let's try it out on different sites. And another tip I'd like to give to everybody: if you ever have problems convincing a manager at your company that you should have some performance improvements, then take that manager, show him his own site and developer tools, make the network just a little bit slower. Let's say 3G or so, and then load the page again and see if he still thinks he doesn't have a performance problem.
Good point, Arthur. Leandro, Señor Performo.
As closing, very important, start paying attention to the web layer, UI, web protocol. I do agree a lot with Arthur that all these, not despectively, but performance testers that are used to just automating protocol processes and slamming applications with them need to start thinking a little bit, I don't think it's out of the box anymore, but start expanding the reach and thinking of other elements that are starting to be really important, and that, from what Mark was mentioning earlier, brought to my attention. Think through how these web pages are being designed. How do you put the elements? Performance testing has to do a lot with the experience of the user. How much are they satisfied? And how are you designing these things to the benefit of the user, for them to be happy and enjoy and have a flowing, fast, and seamlessly transparent application, where instead of putting CSS in the wrong place, huge JavaScripts, huge, and what Mark got me thinking, huge images or videos in your web page where probably you have a catalog full of ultra 4K images for each one of the products. Like, start to think things through, and where am I going to put things, when I'm going to crop them a little bit so that the page renders faster, that I'm not killing the CPU, the RAM, the network of the application, and that the information is flowing in the most effective way. Where, again, and to what Arthur was saying, introduce to your mindset some of the functional testing tools. What can you leverage from other UAT, crowd testing, people that are already running through some of those processes? Hey, why don't you just open the browser, tell them, hey, could you just, easy, tell me if you feel it's slow. That's a big, big advantage to the web protocol, where probably there's no load happening. And you can start detecting some of these problems. And it's a big complaint that I usually have when I get to projects and, hey, you need to load test this. And manually, as Scott mentioned, I get to a customer, the thing is slow. I can just quickly open and say, here you have a problem, here, 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 and wonder why no one ever mentioned this, why no one in the team, the Agile team, noticed it, mentioned it, reported it. Why is it not something to call your task completed, your little post-it, and say, I'm done? To say, hey, it goes fast, it's seamless, I'm not annoyed by it. And well, I'm extending too much. Just to resume, pay attention to web, expand your horizons as a performance tester, and pay attention to the other levels, tiers, network slowing, content, thinking through a table that queries a request one row at a time. Think of those design matters. And yeah, I see some laughing. Everyone has experienced some of those things. Big performance scene to commit. Be careful with all of those.
Thanks. Bruno.
Yeah, just to tell you that, it's going to be very short, because if the perception is today a question of feeling, so this is not anymore a question of technical. So it's not a question for us who are technical guys. This is not our job anymore. So I think that today we are dinosaur guys. That's probably the end of the job for us. Now we are dinosaur because we make all the job to optimize all this web server, all this architecture, front, back, etc. And now the question is not anymore our business. Maybe it's a question of perception. So let's work with social people who are able to explain to the customer or to the company how to spend 1, 2, or 3 seconds to have the information in the website. Thank you.
Seth, did you want to make a promotion for the next virtual pack? What was that's the purpose of dinosaurs? I don't get it. No mind. Scott.
I think the interesting thing from my point of view, this isn't a case of either or. You know, you don't do this or do browser testing. I think it's a case of both. And I think it has to be both, because any metrics you get from the front end are always going to be slightly fuzzy as to whether you're getting first meaningful paint or first interaction time. You're never going to be able to account for everybody's browser configuration and things like that. So you're looking for an inflection point almost as where does the biggest bottleneck occur at any point? Under low load, is it on the browser because something funny is configured? Under high load, is it on your back-end infrastructure? And I think to get to that understanding, you need to know what the components on the front end are doing and how they are interacting with the back end. And you can simulate those at the protocol layer. If you need to have something very, very, very targeted, then you can do that at the protocol layer, and you can have the browser sitting on top with less users, one user, Selenium script, whatever, to give you that delta in views. And I think too, while the browser stuff is probably the way of the future, always remember that there is an architecture sitting at the bottom of that your users are communicating with. And part of your role is to make sure that that architecture is scalable. It has enough capacity to do what it does, because if that falls over, it doesn't matter how efficient you make the front end, it's game over at that stage.
And I totally agree with you. For sure, it's a good point, Scott. Alexander.
I just want to mention that reason why we have silos with tools is because we have silos with groups of professionals. Every group was very specialized. Actually surprising, because performance depends on everything. So it is not one small area where you need to look. It is a whole thing end to end. And it worked for some time due to level of technology, but looks like it is not working anymore. So definitely, if we want to not to be dinosaurs, we need to get in all performance end to end. So, and whatever gaps we have between groups, we need somehow fill them, because that is looks like the requirements now.
Thanks, Alexander. David.
Yeah, no, I would summarize things into two categories. One, I would speak to the front-end developers, and I would say to you this: just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. And I'll just let that one sit. And it's I think most front-end developers will get what I'm talking about. But for the folks that are really involved on the load testing side of things, really my recommendation is when you're doing your load tests, ultimately everyone's been giving great advice today. This has been, I think, a fascinating subject, but make sure that you're always testing from an outside in perspective when you can. You know, you want to test the entirety of that application delivery chain, because as so many of us has pointed out, there are potential bottlenecks that you may have missed if you've only been doing your testing internally. So, you know, test that entire application delivery chain. Make sure you have visibility into as many of the different components in that application delivery chain as you can. And that would be by the things that I would sort of recommend.
I agree. Mark.
Thank you for doing these awesome meetups, Henrik, and to the Neotys crew. This has been really, really fun, and I'm sad that they'll stop for a little while, but it's great to hook up with the pack in such a regular basis. It's almost like the conversation is just rolling and evolving. So just a shout out and a thank you to Henrik and everyone for leading it. I really appreciate it. The only thing I will say is there are some great workshops. Leandro has some. There's some with Dynatrace. There's online content to learn. There's books to read about all of this stuff. Learning about front-end performance bottlenecks. Some of them you find today in a web, in a framework on the front end. And for those of us older load tester types, we'll just shudder because it's like, didn't we solve this problem after Power Builder and Smalltalk and all this other two-tier client-server crap? We didn't solve it. And now things are mobile and everything else. So there are always going to be performance problems. You're not just a load tester. Go out and find performance problems and find the easiest way to make new friends and fix them. And yeah, I go forth and conquer, man. I'm with David.
All right, thanks, Mark. I almost cried, so I was starting to cry, and I just said, "Oh, I cannot cry for the last pack meetup. It's going to be crazy." In fact, it's not really the last pack meetup because we probably do more, but I think doing one per week requires time.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out the right way of dealing with our work and also making sure that we can commit with the community. So while we were doing this, I have a small music for you guys because it's the end. It's the end of our pack meetup of this month, of this lockdown series. And also I'd like to remind you, for those who like dinosaurs, stay tuned because probably in September or October, you will have a Jurassic Pack coming up. And if you feel like you are a dinosaur and you like performance, then you should come and submit your paper with us. You can present anything. We want to remind the basics of performance and also things that make sense to deal with new technology as well. So stay tuned, we will promote it. And also just to remind you as well, we are going to have soon a pack webinar where we're also going to talk about other themes that has not been covered so far. Maybe we'll do also another pack meetup if we have the chance. So stay tuned in the social networks. You will be aware that some new meetup will come up. But if you like performance, if you like to listen about good advices, then you should definitely come to next Monday to Joe Colantonio's conference, Perf Guild. So Monday and Tuesday, Perf Guild will happen. So you would have to definitely join and come and listen to all the great speakers that is part of this year's Perf Guild. And I think there is plenty of great speakers. Joe, could you just promote briefly the speakers that will be there?
Absolutely. We have Scott Moore talking about performance engineering is a big theme. We also have Nicole from Flood.io, which is talking about this exact topic, hybrid browser-based automation using protocol and browser. Really good session there. So a lot of great things going on for sure. So definitely check it out.
Great. Thanks, Joe. All right. So I think another meetup that we delivered. I'm happy about it. I don't have to do any meetup next week, so it's almost vacation for me. So I will probably take a flight and go to Hawaii and take benefits of the sun, if I'm able to fly, of course. All right. Without waiting, I will let you with the end music of this pack meetup. Thanks for everyone to follow, and see you soon.
Cheers,
Adios.
everybody.
Gracias,
Have a good
everybody.
one.
Thank you.
Catch up soon. Pleasure as always. Cheers.
Cheers.
Au revoir.
Goodbye from Thursday.
I don't wanna.
See you guys.